Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome back to Classics Week. And for today, we are covering something a little bit different. This album's actually kind of happy, and I gotta say, Mr. Scaruffi, I'm sorry, but this is a good album. I'm talking about the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour. So I don't talk about the Beatles that much on this channel, but I'm actually a pretty decent fan. I mean, I'm probably not the biggest fan of Beatles in the world, but there's just something that gives me such a soft spot for this album in my heart. A lot of it comes from the Beatles being one of the first bands I actually really got into. A lot of it comes from just the way these songs resonate with me in particular. And honestly, the attitude behind this album is probably one of the biggest selling points, for me anyway. The absolutely explosive positivity coming off of this album is ridiculous and would probably be cheesy in a lot of today's album standards. You could pick any number of albums with even a similar amount of happiness to this piece, and they're probably going to be really corny. You know, somehow the Beatles just do it excellently, and that's not the first time they've done it. A lot of their albums are, of course, poppy, commercial, and as a result probably should be happy, but there's a lot of little intricacies behind this album that make it really hilarious. So this is probably the most based album in existence, probably up there with Year the Snitch, although Year the Snitch is a lot punkier. This one is just kind of a meme, and one reason for that is that it's not even like an actual album, at least in the British version. The Beatles released it as a soundtrack to one of their movies. They made a few movies, by the way. Not many of them are good, but apparently Magical Mystery Tours as the movie was vastly outclassed by the soundtrack of Magical Mystery Tour. There were a couple tracks in the movie version that were not on the album, but I think the album had a couple singles instead. This happened in 1967. It's, I believe, their 9th album, and it's a lot more into their psychedelic range of territory, especially after Sgt. Pepper's. Once Sgt. Pepper's hit, you know, George was obsessed with the psych elements. Like, he had that entire sitar track on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and his psych elements actually, I think, grew a whole lot for this album. As pictured by this meme I had commissioned from our good friend Bridget, the thing I like about this album over Sgt. Pepper's is that I find Sgt. Pepper's to be attempting to be a lot more sophisticated in its exploration of psychedelics and I guess weed in this case. But Magical Mystery Tour is kind of just like, dude, weed, LMAO, and they don't realize it, but they're taking acid several times a day, all of them. Apparently, along this time of recording, there was like maybe a couple hours a day that Lennon was even sober. Apparently he was just constantly tripping this entire time. And you know, that's probably why the happiness actually comes across as so genuine, because none of these dudes were on Earth. They were on some other planet. And with the construction of this album in actuality, I think it's very interesting because this is probably one of the best examples of seeing the members split apart a little more than before, at least in my opinion. You've got Blue Jay Way, which is clearly a George track with how heavily psych it is. The John Lennon tracks are actually smartest lyrically here. And then the Paul tracks, those are normally the most commercial and poppy. For example, Hello Goodbye. That is literally meant to be as catchy as possible. So I've been rambling a bit, but let's just get into the track list. So following the trend of Sgt. Pepper's, we actually open with a title track here that sort of introduces the album in a very grandiose way. And this is another sort of concept album here. I know Sgt. Pepper's was meant to be the first concept album, even though that's been disproved plenty of times. This one, even though it's a soundtrack, you could probably argue that it's also a bit of a concept album in the way that it approaches these concepts, in the way that it sort of is a morph on your perspective on just daily life, and it kind of does that in every track here. And it starts with the track Magical Mystery Tour. So what I like about this track, it has this nice energetic buildup that it's kind of minimalistic. And the thing that I like about Magical Mystery Tour as an album so far, it shows sort of elements of Baroque pop, maybe chamber pop a little bit, just extra instruments that maybe wouldn't be on many other rock albums at the time. I know the Monkees probably would have never done something like this. They add a lot of piano, some, I think, double bass at points, and a lot of horns. And the horns could be so jovial at points that it's kind of ridiculous. One more little thing I want to add that this track kind of introduces to the album in a big way that maybe not everyone's actually introduced to. So a lot of times albums in the 60s were made in mono or even if they were made in stereo, the cut is kind of weird. The Beatles albums, especially this one. So this one is probably their most psychedelic album. They were literally on drugs the entire time. But the stereo cut is actually has a really interesting effect. Some people probably wouldn't like it. It might not be up to their taste, but it's so beyond trippy, and it actually elevates the experience for me. And a lot of times on this album, especially on this track, you got Paul's bass work kind of being the main work here, and you hear him just plucking along the whole time with these really interesting rhythms, and they're completely satisfying. I love the way that the Beatles sort of harmonize over each other on the hook on this song, and then you got Paul sort of just like screaming over the top, which you really don't see a lot up until Abbey Road, I guess. But I just love the way that it all works together in this sort of big vocal harmonious moment, and despite being a little harsher on Paul's end, it just brings so much energy to the table, you can't help but be excited. The next song is called The Fool on the Hill, and this is actually directly a song about an Indian guru that the Beatles were all following strictly during this process. And the song is about how happy he was. And one of the things I like about it is that the song really, if you look at it at face value, it's about perspective and how maybe some people can judge others for having a different perspective, even though they could be just as right as you. I love the instrumentation behind this. It's got a very basic sort of piano kind of droning in the background with the same chords until it eventually layers these winds on top and this pretty basic but completely satisfactory percussion from Ringo Starr. It's one of the more relaxed moments on the album, and it somehow manages to do that without becoming boring at all, which I can appreciate a lot. And definitely something that you can see a lot in other albums of the time, specifically Pet Sounds. You've got that low sort of baritone sax that just kind of like goes and pulses forward in the background, which is always a nice touch. Next, we have the instrumental track, Flying. It starts off with this really nice little psychedelic instrumental before the mellotron kicks in on that saxophone mode, which doesn't sound quite like a saxophone, but probably like a 90s video game on a computer with a saxophone sound effect would have it. But for some reason, it's actually completely satisfactory. The melody is very nice and it's very pleasing. The song has a very slow but fulfilling pace, and it doesn't fail to satisfy. It's even better when the mellotron is switched out for the vocal part. One of the best parts about the song is that it drones out, which I don't know if that's a precursor to anything in the future. I know there have been more psychedelic albums by the time this one was released, but it's just a good example for things to come. And now we reach the absolute trip of a song, Blue Jay Way. Now this opens with what I thought was mellotron, but it might be Hammond organ, I'm not sure. So the tape manipulation on this track I find really interesting, and I know the Beatles aren't the first to manipulate tapes to make a more interesting sound, but the way it happens here is kind of remarkable. The way it happens is they take a previous recording of the track where you hear George's voice, and they reversed it and used it to kind of echo after George's verse in the track that was actually used for the final cut. So you have sort of like this call and answer where he sings his really sleepy, sort of drony vocal part, and it's kind of echoed out with this almost like a ghost of himself. And this song honestly sounds like it's in an entirely other dimension. These incredibly simple lyrics actually build a ton of atmosphere. This song sounds so beyond sleepy, but it's like you have to sleepwalk through life. And Ringo's drumming, as simple as it is actually even more effective here because it's just barely keeping the pace of the song and it's really lumbering forward. Not only is this song incredibly classic, probably one of the most influential tracks on the album. Also, side note, apparently Genius labels this track as darkwave. I don't know if I'd say that, but you go, Genius people. Next we have Your Mother Should Know, one of the most clear Paul written songs on the album. This is what started the sort of granny Paul memes where Paul just makes these songs about being old. Now, while this track might not be too experimental, it is a classic and straight to the point track that doesn't fail to deliver. I thought honestly it might be a little bit sleepy here and there, just maybe a little slow, but it works pretty well. Paul's voice sounds great on this track, and I really can't complain about his voice ever. It's normally pretty much a smash hit. And of course, the echoey sort of choral vocals that follow in the background are perfect, and I can't help but love them. Next, we reach one of my favorite tracks on the album, I Am the Walrus. Now, if you guys don't know the concept behind this track, then I pity you because it's hilarious. It's literally like a middle finger to the English professors that you guys never liked, who are always telling you to analyze things even when there's not that much of a meaning. And the thing is, this song it's almost like post-Dada, and the way it approaches it. It's got so many intricacies in the lyrics, and I implore you guys to look these up, because they make no sense. There's zero sense. It's a total meme. But the thing is, it was made in a way that you don't need to understand most of it. Honestly, you only really need to grasp like a tiny bit. And basically the entire concept is that even though you got all these metaphors and all these things, none of it really matters. Lennon actually came up with these lyrics, combining two different acid trips. It's got this nice droney build to the song before eventually John's vocals come in, and it's totally satisfying. And you got these altered vocals from Lennon that he said to use a bad microphone for. Not to disregard Lennon's vocals here, they're actually really fun. Apparently he asked to sound like he's from the moon. There's also more sampling used in this track, actually, where they sampled apparently a viewing of King Lear, which actually kind of goes with the sort of English teacher motif, because, you know, the song is actually inspired because students were asking what the song was about because they had to analyze it. The song is like 100,000 different red herrings. Next we reach another Paul track, Hello Goodbye. This is another very direct sort of chamber pop psych Paul track that, again, completely delivers. Now, if you guys know the song, then you know the song. It is as direct as it gets, and honestly, the lyrics, for me, lack a little bit. Obviously, it's literally like 20 words in the whole song, probably not even. It's just kind of hello and goodbye over and over again. But if it wasn't incredibly catchy, I would be lying. Also, halfway through the song, vocals keep getting layered on, and it adds a whole lot. Also, the sort of closing section where they all kind of riff on top of each other is very satisfying and really jovial. I can't knock this song that much just because it's so happy. Paul said that apparently the song's about like balance or whatever. I don't get it. It seems about like a messed up relationship, I guess, and it's really not that big of it's not that crazy of a thing, but sure. And next we reach the absolute classic Strawberry Fields Forever. So the song opens with that utterly gorgeous Mellotron intro on that sort of flute part, which I think was very similar to what King Crimson was about to do in a couple years. I love the sort of plucked bass and guitar lines on the chorus. They give it a real amount of body and momentum, and the way that the choruses seem to add more and more sonic just mass to it as the second chorus adds in these lower bass notes, and the percussion is also layered quite a bit as well. And the song, honestly, it's kind of hard to describe the feeling it gives you, but I found it that it like almost like inspires you to feel better rather than directly making you just feel happy. But it does do that. It's a fantastic song and it's fantastically happy, but it almost like inspires you to be optimistic in other senses. These confusing lyrics, believe me, they're confusing. If you don't know what they are, then I can't blame you. They actually add a whole lot of psychedelic sort of body to this track, on top of what was already there. And of course, the droney vocal lines are a little sleepy and really give a little bit extra, almost like the narrator himself is tripping, which he was. The lyrics themselves are actually pretty smart. I can always appreciate that. I love how the song, normally when a song goes on, it's normally a bad thing, but here it just kind of whirls around and kind of reprises and comes back down. It's almost like it's living and breathing. And one of the most brilliant things possibly ever is that they put this song right behind Penny Lane. Now, Penny Lane, it's a pleasant track, it's a Paul track, but just thinking about this town that's incredibly ordinary and simple, and believe me, it is ordinary and simple. These lyrics here are not that much to write home about. There's like one line that's interesting, that's sort of like a sexual innuendo, and at least in British terms, but that was apparently written by Lennon. I love how after the incredibly optimistic Strawberry Fields, it sort of like gives you a feeling of nostalgia for this town that you've never lived in. This all kind of comes together to give you the best Paul track on the album. It's also got a couple really memorable hooks that just really soothe you and make you as happy as possible. Next we get the track Baby You're a Rich Man. Apparently Mick Jagger was featured on this track in backing vocals. That's what I think Wikipedia said. I don't know. I can't really hear him, but I think it's just an interesting little fact. Now, as well as a few other tracks on this album, you've got a really nice bass-driven opening, which, again, Paul is just killing it here. Also, just one thing I want to mention about Beatles instrumentation. I know, like, most of them aren't, like, masters at their instruments. I'm pretty sure they've had jazz artists come in and just, like, absolutely get furious with them for not knowing how to play. I know Ringo's beats are kind of simple, maybe a little syncopated here and there, and you got Paul's bass lines, which are certainly consistent, but probably not too technically complex. The thing is, they really prove that you don't need to be maximalist here. You can kind of layer a whole bunch of things on top of each other, which is kind of pushed forward by the kind of chamber pop sound of this album, and it's only amplified more on this track. Now, it is a simple song that grows a whole ton for the chorus. I love the yelly lines. They're very awesome, and they don't even feel a little bit abrasive. And I love the message saying that really all you need is inside of you. It is referring to you, the listener, as a rich man. Like, you might not have much money, but really your happiness is the money that you have already. Rounding off this track list, you have the classic All You Need Is Love, another Lennon track with incredible optimism. It's a nice way of closing off the album in a hippy-dippy, happy way, and believe me, it is hippy-dippy. It's probably one of John's simplest songs. Not that much to write home about in terms of complexity in the instrumentation, but the way that it's placed at the end of the album, and it isn't a sad track like you would probably expect on most albums, it really rounds off this sort of message of the whole album. I love the idea where all the Beatles in the background are singing love over and over again to this sort of choral effect that it really is meant to just be as universal as possible. You only need one word, and it's love. Is it hypocritical of John? Sure, but I'll take it. If you can keep a frown on your face while this song is playing, I applaud you, or I'd be really mad at you because you're just being stubborn, but there's no way you can be genuinely upset when this song is playing. So that's Magical Mystery Tour in a nutshell. Pretty simple album brought to an extreme from just the genius of these guys coming together with saying, hey, how can I do very little with getting the most out of it? The layering of extra little horn sections and the little tape effects, as well as the usage of the mother of all instruments, the mellotron, just leads to an incredibly pleasing little psych album. Of course, there are a couple bits where the lyrics lack, and believe me, they do lack, and you kind of can't really look over them that much. But other than that, pretty much flawless. Now, I'm not going to be elitist like I normally am and actually criticize this thing for maybe not having any swooping solos or a 12-minute prog epic, even though that's kind of my standards. Every song on this album is satisfying. It's happy, and it'll make you happy, and if it doesn't, I don't know what you're doing. Just be prepared for one of the happiest listening experiences you've probably ever had. And like I said before, this album is based in Red Pilled. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, I'd appreciate a comment down below. Or go ahead and follow my social media. I will totally talk to you guys there. And that's about it. I hope you guys are having a good time out there, and I hope to see you guys next time. Have a good day. Bye.